Did you do all this stuff already? Are you doing this stuff? Oh, interesting. I only do it once a week. Just, you know, the weekly haul. That's about it. Alright, so we have to gather these peepos. Hi. Hello. Hi. Hello. Where's the entrance? Oh. Right. Just unlocked the dungeon. Been running that. I capped my weekly haul. I like to save all the main to do near the end to follow the story. I see. Fair enough. That is certainly an alternative approach. I do episodic recaps. I talk about what happened last, talk about what happens now, what's going to happen, and I review each week. Fair enough. Seems like you know what you want, you know?
Fools! You're disrupting the ritual!
I tend to focus on live service gaming, so I bootstrap through the mentality and the approach of enjoying a live service game over treating it as not a live service game.
Little Grump, you were in my web long before this day.
Retreat for now! We will return!
Helps get into the psychology of it, you know? No, it's about the psychology and expectations, forming healthy habits and lining up emotional dissonance with intellectual appreciation for how the structure works, as opposed to consuming it the way I would like it, or assuming a design is pandering to you. I like to get into the mindset of the developer and the business model. So experiencing it differently would be counterintuitive.
We've done the best we can.
Is that fun for me? I don't really do things for fun. That's why you do the thing you do and prefer the way you do it. I do it for experience and empathy. There's a different approach, different purpose of playing and observing things, evaluating things. It's a good experience for people who have the proper mindset for live service games. So it wouldn't be a good experience for you if you played it the way it's intended to be developed and marketed. Hence, I would naturally encourage you to do what you're doing. Can you describe a live service game? Well, a live service tends to fundamentally be focused on creating habits. Habits tend to come in any type of habit forming behavioral model requires a mindset that involves incremental actions, like repetitive actions that are sustainable. So, for example, if you want to change your diet, what would be a natural program that would be reliably form a habit that reduces the barrier of entry while insisting on repeated action, like eating your vegetables? That's what a live service game tends to focus on developing. So the idea is you experience these things, you evaluate it based on a premise of trying to alleviate and introduce quality of life changes that produce a lifestyle change. And how to promote that is where the challenge of making a successful live service game is, focusing on that. So if you don't necessarily experience that or evaluate that in that type of perspective, rarely do your criticisms ever become very compelling to the business model and the developers who are challenged to make a game successful in that way. So when you have an active dissonance with your experience, you will come to expect things that are inherently antagonistic to the design. Am I understanding that's also as how to monetize a game best as to where the struggle would be for some? Yes. So, if someone asks you, how would you monetize things? But if your experience is often to the point where you want upfront upfront completed models, like products at an upfront cost, that is not necessarily aligned with the business practice or the developer's intent on the development cycle. It is very appropriate if you play a game like Baldur's Gate 3, for example, which is a great offset for those who want a completed product and consume as much story at their own pace. But that type of mindset comes with an emotional preference. And your emotional preference, in order to enjoy this game, you have the flexibility of choosing to make it your experience, which is great. However, while you have the flexibility and emotional maturity of enjoying a product outside its intended model, right? Its intended business model, that's great coming from someone who has a lot of loyalty, experience, tolerance, and maybe even a lot of self-awareness. It doesn't necessarily inform where to go forward in a game bound by a business model and a development cycle to be evaluated and approached to help guide design choices for newer players who may lack your experience, your emotions, your loyalty, and your background in RPGs. I tend to experience these games like I don't experience single-player games. Again, to why I don't do events anymore. They are extremely grindy, offer little in the way of enjoyment. I notice I often get frustrated hoping for change, which I see now is perfectly good. Either do it or... Yes. Yeah. So, I think you're doing a lot of extra work to make yourself enjoy this game, and that's very admirable. That's you're offering a different perspective where, hey, if I'm a person who really wants to enjoy everything all at once, you can make commentary on that. So you complement the different perspectives, right? And I'm playing this game deliberately in the manner that the game will be done. Like every week you play like once, largely once. And so then I make criticisms or things, maybe something to enhance the retention for the way. Yeah. So It's fun solving the problem. It's fun looking at where they're going or what, trying to infer and dictate, like determine what they're aiming for. The game itself, it can be fun, but my intent is not to have fun. My intent is to learn something. Would you say they're basically selling solutions to problems they intentionally cause? That's a interesting way to ask that question. I'm not inherently a cynical person. Cynicism has very little place in pragmatism. So I would say I haven't thought about it. One, I would say it's fair. One can interpret that. If they're, especially one that might be quite cynical about business models. Because it is a pro-profit. It's a video game, right? It's a live service game. So it is intentionally made to make money. And one can interpret the cynicism of creators by inferring that they could intentionally cause it. The business model, say I were to operate the development cycle in order to encourage monetization that is freely purchasable by players that are loyal to you. Inherently, in terms of live service models, live service game models, the investment is upfront in the player before expecting payback. So the selling solution is often coming first without the intent of causing any problems. For example, let's think of successful live service stuff, right? Like, let's think of successful live service stuff. HelloFresh. They'll give you 10 meals for free and then get you to buy stuff. So inherently, most business models would go out of their way to offer a service that comes back and pays in dividends. Your smartphone plan. They offer you upfront the necessities to participate and use the service. And then eventually you have to pay for the service. Or it hooks you on a service that is affordable. So generally speaking, most live services, the most well-practiced ones, tend to come with the intent of getting the person in the ecosystem before monetizing it. So I don't necessarily think they cause problems. They incentivize the use of convenience for a problem you create. So the goal here is the most successful live services tend to try to get the consumer to realize they want more. And once they're successful, they can sell the ecosystem. And that's kind of how the most successful live service games work. So you can play Fortnite for free all the time, what have you, go for it. But because you're stuck in that ecosystem, you begin to be compelled to invest in the ecosystem. Works very well with Apple's closed ecosystem or Nintendo's services. Like, I forgot what the Nintendo's package is called, but you'll want to have the player interested enough to want to invest because they're enjoying themselves. Yeah, whether if it's malicious or not, that is the initial goal. I think it would be a very dangerous gamble for a business model to focus on the intent of creating a problem where there isn't one, especially a live service game. One of the fundamentals of this type of psychology that works really well for the successful projects are the idea that you're forming a habit. And if you look at life, right? If you look at your live habits, what are the most consistent methods in psychology to develop habits? We're not talking about bad or good. Those are up to your opinion and is dependent on the individual variability and their morals and ethics. But for a human to form a habit formation, they must create a enough low barrier of entry that allows the repetition to feel trivial, but then feel disproportionately rewarding in order to create the repetition in action. And that repetition in action is reinforced enough that the barrier becomes lower and lower. And then when the barrier becomes low enough, you can introduce incentives to raise that barrier again, like paying money for a service. So one great example would be I do enjoy running, and I had to lower the barrier of running through my own choice in order to consistently do it. And then when I do it enough, I begin to invest in running. So habitually and voluntarily, I would buy running shoes. Hence, the running shoe industry focuses on incentivizing how to improve your running, not necessarily cause a new obstacle. They enhance and encourage what is attractive about the task you've already voluntarily entered. So translating that to a live service model, they create the incentive to want to do more, and then they sell you the incentive. They'll essentially instill a form of addiction, especially intense in certain individuals. I talked about this digression a little bit in a different segment, but when someone uses the word addiction, they compartmentalize desirable and undesirable habits. A habit that's undesirable is ascribed the word addiction. A habit that is desirable is considered just a desirable habit, a beneficial habit. So the distinction between a habit and something that's undesirable is just addiction. So the principles behind addiction and forming any habit that you desire tends to be very similar. So you got to ask yourself, what are your good habits? As a business model and someone who's developing a product, you rely on observing the most reliable ways of forming habits. Now, when you use the word addiction, it's because you're thinking about all the habits that you do not desire to have, which gaming addiction could be one of them, perhaps, or spending money could be one of them. Like my addiction would be, or my habit that I form is playing this game Fragmented. That's a habit I have. You could consider it an addiction if is a habit that you do not want. But emotionally, I find it very encouraging, and it breaks from the tedium of other things I do, right? I play games that don't require fragmented playthroughs. In fact, you could say you have a habit of wanting contiguous storylines. And it's an addiction because when you try to play Neverwinter Fragmented, you go through withdrawal symptoms because you're doing something not normalized, if you know what I mean. So anytime you have to break a pattern of preference, it is discomforting. It is undesirable. So hence, you have an addiction to something very good. Like you want that. It makes you feel good. So an addiction is anything you feel good, but it becomes a habit because it's sustainable. You know? It's why there's an interest in keeping the endgame alive, because others see the results. Yes. So, and for me, I don't need those things because my interest is understanding business models and live service games. I love the psychology involved in live service games. What makes the most successful live service games, you can use those techniques that you discover about yourself to apply them to forming habits in your life. So video games can offer a source of freely less consequential ways of experimenting with forming habits. So, one fun experiment is, how do you get yourself to like playing fragmented, time-gated stuff? If you can do that well, efficiently, and sustainably, if you take that approach and apply it to, I don't know, getting healthier or learning to meditate, things that have higher barrier, you can keep it's a very transferable skill. So I'm more focused, I mean, the times when I play Neverwinter or PSO NGS is the time when I'm not consuming what personally I do prefer, which is what you described. I like my experience at my own pace. I like that flexibility. However, it makes me less tolerable over time if I only do the things I prefer. Hence my addiction, because it becomes addiction when it bars you from doing other things. Narrow-mindedness is a result of incredible addiction, which is an addiction to complacency. Being comforting with what you know and what you accept is true, and breaking away from it is difficult. So I personally find that my life calling is to remain intellectually open, and that involves trying to find a way to be comfortable with constantly doing things that I'm uncomfortable with. And there's also sensitizing and resensitizing. You know, some influencers, trendy influencers, would probably refer to it as detoxing. That's kind of a weird way to look at it, but it is could be it's a negative way to look at it. Basically, you're removing something instead of embracing and understanding what happens in the human condition. On that topic, would you say the logboxes currently in game are gambling? As others mentioned, it can't be gambling if you are getting something. Interesting. That's why I vowed to never play another MMO after Neverwinter, my choice, because I realized I had seen it for what it is, so I focus on what I still enjoy. Yeah, that's fair enough. I'm in terms of that, I tend to talk about, like, when I talk to other, like, the occasional individual who's suffering from selective avoidance. I'll give a hot take. I'll quote someone else's hot take, but 2 or 3 very successful people, we'll call them classically successful, they typically agree with the idea that if you're always expecting life to be filled with happiness and content, that's incredibly unrealistic. So expecting to always be able to maximize a high would insist that you do not necessarily understand at the moment. I'm not saying you can't have this forever. You could try. But what happens when you are avoidant of things you don't want to do and constantly seeking to maximize what you do want to do, you enter a phase of desensitization. So you become a bit numb to all the things you like. So inherently, you will constantly seek more to create the same stimuli of satisfaction. Eventually, it will become unsustainable. And then you'll go through the fear of it will accentuate all the necessities. So your condition to stay happy or doing what you want will continue to go up. It's kind of like if you get good at a game, for example, that diminished return in emotional satisfaction continues to drop as your proficiency goes up. It's a really common human condition, and that's what creates addiction a lot of times. It's all relevant to what we're talking about. It's understanding yourself through repetitive action. The worst is FOMO. FOMO would be one of the natural progresses of being too invested in things you only like. So you lost your knowledge. You're getting insensitive to your current standards, and your standards continue to rise because you focus on the same stimuli over time. So that's why when people go through like a mental vicious feedback loop that is not sustainable, they go through momentary crises. And crises tend to be alleviated by changing environment, and then the cycle repeats. That's typically a very truncated, we can think of this, it can go for 20 years, 30 years. A person can cycle every 30 years. So you get like a midlife crisis, generally speaking. Some are more sensitive, so the cycle can be repeated, accelerated, and video games is one that can be incredibly accelerated. I absolutely dislike that business owner with a passion. A while back, I got so burnt out that it disgusts me and turned out on me. So now, whenever I see that, do this, act now and fast, I just skip altogether or do it high pace and accept I get whatever I do get, and that's good. That's fair. Totally. This is literally addiction in any other form, be it substance or emotional. It's a habit. Habits can be desirable. Addictions can be desirable, but you're only referring to all the habits you don't like. Addiction has all the characteristics of habits outside sustainability. So I would say the center pin, the core to a habit being viewed as an addiction is that it's not sustainable. And truly experience a good high without the lows. There has to be that balance. Yes. Yeah, stagnation. I usually refer to stagnation in terms of the emotional standpoint as complacency. So when you become complacent, your standards need to elevate. And then when the standard continues to elevate, eventually it becomes asymptotic. So it will reach a fever pitch, right? And that becomes no longer sustainable. And then typically a person would either become numb or they become so intolerable that they go through a mental crisis. And that is what live service games have to battle every single day. So like if you're a developer and you have a business model, like your executives, they have to collaborate enough to understand how they can create their business model to be sustainable long enough before an environmental change. Basically, either the game shuts down and a new project is introduced, a change of environment, map out the longevity, and repeat. So it mirrors what you need to do to form a habit, leave the habit, develop a new habit. In life, your mental structure and your physical well-being and mental, specifically your mental well-being, is through the efficiency of creating new habits, dropping those habits, starting a new one, and then returning to an old habit if you so desire. So it's often live service games in part one of the most difficult tasks humans have, which is the ability to incentivize change, instill the change, create the habit, sustain it for a fixed amount of time that you expect realistically, be able to exit that habit and embrace a new habit. So that's what hobbies are, right? I'm describing a hobbies, and hobbies contribute to quality of life, but a sustainable hobby is incredibly rare. And if you do have one, you eventually create an addiction that the tolerance goes down and the gatekeeping. The thing you observe is the rise in gatekeeping, which is your standards. Your standards continue to go up. It deals with acquiring skills, skill acquisition is very similar. It's I'm like repackaging the human condition over and over again. The human condition of the balance between complacency, like stimuli response, and mental well-being. So your happiness tends to be escalating, right? Because we love to desire our dopamine from specific stimuli, but if it's inherently one form, that leads to that thing we call addiction, because it's so enriched in that one form that you can't possibly divorce yourself from it until a crisis happen, which is when you realize it can't put out anymore. Like morphine. I mean that's a chemical slash physical example, which is easier to in my opinion is often more intuitive to use as an example. But now we're talking about mental habit formation, like having a conversation like this. My conversations become inherently longer and longer and more extravagant or verbose because I specialize in this skill. I choose voluntarily to specialize in this skill. But from time to time, I must participate in being not this, learning, relearning, and having conversations on exchanging platitudes and not becoming too over analytical, right? That's the way to balance it. And sure enough, that's what I do with Neverwinter. This is uncommon for me. I play live service games, but it occupies far less of my time and thoughts. But I do this in order to remind myself alternatives and other approaches. People enjoy this intuitively more than I do. And I want to understand that. Businesses and developers successfully apply this model very often, like incredibly often, and I want to understand that. I don't necessarily think it's my preference or what I want. Like a dragon is what I want, but for the time being. And I always say for the time being, because eventually I develop a new habit, move on. Because without moving on and coming back, things get you're embracing the human condition. If you can accept that mentally, it could help you emotionally. But if you can't and you don't understand it, you can enter a vicious cycle with yourself. Like, it's to the point where some people hate to love the thing they hate, like they used to love. We've seen this with Neverwinter, right? You hate to play something, but you still do it. And those are people who don't necessarily have enough self-awareness to know that it's actually very reasonable the way they feel. It's a very classical pattern for someone. Just going cold turkey, I get ticked enough that you just don't want it anymore, and now yeah, that's the crises. So when you go cold turkey, that's a crisis break. You basically just had enough. For me, I wean off. I go in and out on a steady slope. So like I exit gradually and I enter gradually most of the time. The reason why I can't really answer, is this game fun? Is it good or bad? Is the way I don't, most of the time I don't do things because they're fun. I do them because I'll learn to like them, or I'll learn their significance. So, because of that, I rely on other people's interests in order to find an intent of investing in time. And live service games are ubiquitous, right? They're almost the most lucrative model. So because of their popularity And I'm not talking about sentimental popularity, just pragmatic popularity. I want to understand it as best as I can. And in order to understand it, it's not to do or participate in it in the manner that suits me. It's to participate and understand it in the manner that you're trying to understand the people who create and model these things. And that will give you a lens into perhaps you have some constructive criticism in the future for it. But without experiencing it as is intended, it's difficult to be critical emotionally or pragmatically. Typically, emotionally would be, this is not my game, I want it this way, right? And that's very fair if you experience, if your route to enjoying something is making sure that it meets your expectations. That is almost the most logical way of approaching it. For me, I'm trying to be pragmatic, and it's ironic. It's ironic, but to be a human being to approach something logically, they also have to be emotionally invested, right? You have to weigh your emotional preferences. So inherently, I'm actually approaching this thing less logically, and I just refer to it as pragmatism. A lot of times, we have this Spock moment, right? It's not logical because you're emotional about it. It's like, well, you're human. It's only logical to behave with emotions when solving problems. It's illogical to avoid your emotions. This is a long-winded discussion, but it's kind of like a paradox. For me, I want to learn the emotional state and intellectual state of someone who is not myself. And that is very difficult. But the first place you can do, and video games do it very well, is to literally participate in it as well as you can. And that's kind of what I do. So in order to give a true reflection, I guess, trying to simulate what it's like to play this game, if you have no prior knowledge, no preferences, no RPG background and stuff, and maybe you like D&D, that's the experience that I'm going for. Now, that's kind of my brand, like that's kind of my brand of what I want to record. But when this stream goes off, like, I do things based on my own preference, for sure. I record things for posterity because I want it to be maybe useful in some way to someone. It's like, what does it feel like to play Neverwinter? Well, it's probably not finicking it around so that it plays like Baldur's Gate 3. That's probably not what most people are going to get. So I'm trying to think emotionally, who do I pander to in terms of this game? Well, first I have to clarify what a live service game is, what a reasonable expectation of live service game is, so that when someone approaches this game, they won't get angry at me for misleading them or something like that. So if I'm talking to someone who's emotionally prepared and with the proper intellectual like information I'm providing or the impression I'm providing, they can be happier. So I steer the people away that would likely be unhappy with playing this game and attempt my best to steer people who prefer this type of thing to the game. And that's the stuff that I record. Like a dragon, I do not pander to people. I do not pander to people and try to convince them. Like, I'm not selling Like a Dragon. That's not my thing. I'm not selling Neverwinter. I'm telling you, I'm trying my best to know if you're going to like it or not going to like it. And it's not by understanding what my own preferences is. The more I express what I think the game should be, the less likely this person will have an accurate opinion about this game. Unless big asterisks. I will sell the things that are aligned with me, which Neverwinter is not one of them. So I don't necessarily say I think it's fun or it reflects me, but it doesn't take away from how interesting it is to be someone not like me. And if you're into D&D and role-playing, that's what I'm doing. I'm role-playing as hard as I can. That's why we play, in my opinion, that's why we play role-playing games. But I'm role-playing beyond this game. I'm role-playing live service. I'm role-playing the player. What kind of players would this game attract? Let's think about it. It's like, well, if I'm a Baldur's Gate 3 lover, I will absolutely hate this game. For sure. Like 80 to 90% chance. If I thought, oh man, that 500-hour session of Baldur's Gate 3, I need more D&D. Say, Neverwinter Online's interesting. I wonder what the experience is like. Not for you guys. I'm sorry. But you can always watch someone and watch all the fun things that are in the game and like gawk at the details. You don't necessarily have to play it because it won't give you the same mechanical feedback that it's like to play Larian Studios Baldur's Gate 3, for example. That kind of thing. But I don't play any Larian Studio games. So the challenge is to get the impression without saying like, it's not for me, so I can't possibly like it or something like that. It's kind of fun. I think it's a great social experiment. It keeps me happy and content, and there's no shortage of people's perspective. I mean, we're on the internet after all, so there's no shortage of trying to embrace another person's opinion that's not yours and trying to understand it, at least momentarily. So every single day I'm role-playing someone, I suppose. And that's the fun aspect. That gets me on stream and on Twitch and all the time. Like the endless experiments. It's impossible to sustain, so could a change in patterns, higher drop rates becoming lower, be a way for them to reset that high only to bring it up again? Yeah, but it comes with adoption, right? So can it survive? It does sound fun and give you a bunch of different yeah. It incentivizes not behaving like yourself, which is not recommended, obviously, when you are outside, right? But this is games are a platform, and when you're playing a role-playing game, one of the easily, in my opinion, one of the easily fun thing to do is roleplay. Like, I'm inherently trying to roleplay here. If someone absolutely hates the game, I have to roleplay and understand how this person hates the game. And with that ability to roleplay, I can make concessions and try not to offend the person while also openly suggesting something else, right? But at the same time, I have to also resonate with them. Like for me, I want my stories contiguous. Like, I understand I can empathize with you. I'll even state specifically when I can empathize with you and when I cannot. It kind of hurts to have fragmented stories. In fact, in Like a Dragon, I played through the story, the MSQ only, even though the game is largely not designed in that way. But then I play it through fragmented. And then when I finish all the completionist stuff, I do a victory lap, which is playing through the whole MSQ again. So I'm trying to like broaden different perspectives. So depending on where you catch the content, there will be something like in the beginning, if you just want to see the MSQ, I play through the MSQ contiguously as possible as I can with slight side trips because games don't necessarily allow you to do that, especially like a Dragon games. But then at the end, it's the pure one. So you get the best of both worlds. Haphazard version, full contiguous section, or what if I just picked up the game? Can I do it? Kind of thing. So as many perspectives as possible. It incentivizes you to play a game over and over again. I'm like, how many different ways can you play Neverwinter online? Now, let's just say that's a work in progress for Cryptic. I play PSO2 NGS because there are far more than one way to play the game. In fact, two of the most popular ways to play PSO NGS has nothing to do with its core combat system. And Neverwinter Online is infamous probably from taking it away. Do you like playing it multiple times in that manner? Is it fun for you to do fast, continuous, slow? It's very informative. I think the fun thing that I get out of most things is how much I learn about myself and how much that can be used to help someone else. So inherently, it's fun to learn things. The context and stuff may not necessarily be fun. Absolutely. Like, for example, I could watch. I don't want to get like. I could watch. I think a grotesquely violent video, right? But I wouldn't say it would be because it's grotesquely and violent. It's fun, but it would be really interesting and fun to learn what that type of content appeals to. What kind of mindset you would be necessary to enjoy that type of content. My favorite preference? Deep dives, psychology, deep dives. It has to be overtly, incredibly complex. So like, in a way, politics kind of offer that, but the problem is if you're not a politician yourself, you do not have enough to appreciate the complexity of the things. So a facsimile of intricate dialogue would be something like Neverwinter. And what I mean by Neverwinter, I mean the concept of Neverwinter, or the concept of D&D. The fictional world building, politics, religion, racial things. And then when you have a conversation between two people, as a gamer, right, as a person who plays, you have enough omniscience. Like, sometimes you're omniscient, sometimes you're not. They produce different perspectives. But because of that, the interaction between characters, what one character knows and what another character knows, that back and forth, like calling people's bluffs, like there's a double meaning, triple meaning, the more it gets overly blown out, like, and inherently obtuse is my general preference. Because my standards for communication, or that need to be satisfied with intellectual discussions, is off the charts. It's the thing that I'm saying I have an addiction to, and it's not sustainable. So most of the time I spend coping with that. And what I mean by coping, sensitizing. So I spend a lot of my times talking to younger people, talking to people who are the straight and narrow, people who have single visions. They're incredibly selective. They have low tolerance, and being constantly talking to them and hearing their stuff helps me normalize what I can say very comfortably, which is an excessive need for complexity. And that helps because I find it more rewarding when I spend a lot of time in a different environment. So when I'm not talking to someone and I'm not streaming, If this sounds complex now, or obtuse, or grandiose, or incredibly esoteric, I'm being very restrained at the moment, as restrained as I can, because I know that I have an incredible high tendency, the need to sound unnecessarily complicated. Yeah, yeah. So you're dipping and going just to help appreciate. Like sometimes you can be so comfortable in yourself that you forget where you started, where others could be starting, how you used to love things that you do now, but you love them less because you no longer know what it was like. Like, for example, a lot of people would say, oh, yeah, nostalgia's great. But nostalgia is one component. The other component is you inherently don't like the thing you like now more than the first time you did it. So you can no longer empathize with your old self. One of the one of the primary human conditions is that emotions are not encoded in memory. Like they're not accurately encoded. Like for example, you could say, "Oh yeah, this is exactly how I remembered it." It's like that's not. We want to think that's how we remember it, but memory is not the same as intellectual stuff. Like intellectual details are encoded very accurately. Emotions change over time, and the way we remember it change over time. So we want to believe this is how it felt the first time, but that's a basic human condition. We emotions. There are a few people on this planet, right? There are a few people who are genetically born in a way that they can almost inherently relive an emotion. But the way to achieve that is they constantly relive that event. Like, so we're not any of those. A healthy human being tends to not have to cope with the idea that they continuously remember the emotions the way it is. Because imagine having trauma or any form of negativity, and you have to live that event identically over and over again. For the safety and sanity of how humans work, we typically do not have great emotional memory. So in order to get that emotional memory back, in order to like create contrast and range, we have to experience other things. So like experiencing a negative thing accentuates experiencing the positive thing, even if they're not contextually lined up, because we can intuit emotions out of context. We don't need an intellectual context to be able to sensitize things. So inherently, you can make some of your habits sustainable. Preferably, you can create things undesirable and participate in them in order to enjoy other things. Healthy lifestyle, having a job that you kind of don't like in certain aspects that don't overlap with a hobby that you like in different aspects. And then you dislike something in your hobbies that your job offers positively. And what happens is, while you don't like specific parts of your job, it accentuates the stuff that your hobby provides. Your hobby doesn't provide certain things that your job provides. And that creates a balance of stimuli. So inherently, when I'm talking to like young people, right, or younger people, or those who are incredibly privileged, there is some overlap here, but we won't go into that here. They suffer from specific things, and it's the desire to be consistent, like consistently stimulated in a positive way. So in both cases, they are very inherent, and it could be young privileged people, avoidant behavior. And trying to communicate in a very emotionally empathetic way to get them in my opinion, to encourage them to realize that avoidant behavior is a beneficial, reasonable solution to their non-sustainable need for more positive stimuli. That's kind of when you get a breakthrough moment, especially for those who are incredibly depressed, as in they become progressively depressed because they selectively like a few things and their tolerance went down to everything else, to the point where they keep seeking that selective thing and it no longer provides happiness. So it feels like they have no choice. Like there's no other options. So they continue to maximize and try to seek that same thing, but it gets dulled out over and over again to the point where it's like everything's numb. And then now you are stuck with the thing you love that can't provide the stimuli anymore, and everything else you hate because your tolerance has gone out the window because you've invested everything in it. That's kind of like asking a specialized blacksmith to give up blacksmithing after doing blacksmithing for 60 years. It's practically the end of their lives, right? Like it feels like all the joy was taken out. So in some way, having something you like that keeps on giving is so rare. But if you do have one of those, there are examples of that. Those are the really lucky people. I would say that's luck. And creating, hopefully you're born with that luck. Absolutely. Ignore everything I say if you're a person who just happened to be born in a way where you constantly intuit a sustainable skill or a sustainable thing. Like those are the jackpot winners, but they're not the average person. They're not the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people go through cycles. So the greatest example I can think of, and this is a weird example, this is out of left field. People who are inherently, let's just say, have enough skills to come up with, to innovate on how to make money. If you are inherently obligatorily greedy, but you so lucky enough that your ideas that you intuit trends with acquiring more more money, you can probably go through a whole lifetime with it being sustainable. It's not sustainable, but it will go beyond your lifetime. So if you're one of those lucky people who have a skill or a hobby or some sort of habit that is not sustainable, but it outlives you, nothing I say is relevant, in my opinion. Straying away from that means you're depriving yourself of the only, an easy, sustainable, easy lifetime source of happiness. But for most people, that's so rare. Like being born with exact and everything trends exactly the way you want. Those are the lucky ones. But I'm not encouraging luck. Like I wouldn't ask someone who's suffering from finding their passion and whatnot and just say, hey, steer clear of it because eventually it's going to stop giving out. I can't guarantee that it's going to, I can't say it's going to give out. I don't know that. I'm just exercising caution and encouraging. But generally speaking, the people I'm talking to are those who it already gave out. So like their source of passion, Neverwinter Online, finding games, live service games, and talking about how people feel and their concerns and how they're angry, emotional, Protectors Enclave chat, reading those things reading them and trying to discern those things is it's very telling of what's happening in their real life. If you get enough patterns and enough experience, you can easily just resonate and help. Based Basically, it's fun to know exactly what to say to someone to make them feel good. Or like, exactly, that's the goal. Obviously, I can't do that most of the time, but the idea is it's fun to try. It's always fun to learn any possible way to make someone who is suffering suffer less, maybe even for a day. And that's why I do all these things. I think that's the most fun. The ultimate goal now is to build legacy for me. So the selfish thing is I'm building legacy, and my legacy is communication skills, and all of that is bundled in the idea that I have to experience as many things as possible, not because I'm interested in it. It's because it enables me to at least offer something to anyone at any situation. So it's to I had this digression maybe like a month ago about the value of words and walking the walk as opposed to talking walking the walk in order for me to talk the talk. So I walk the walk as in I experience things in order to talk to people. Because in our day and age, it's a paradox now. The paradigm has shifted. The major form of interaction between the current generation, as in like Z and post Z, right? Alpha, I think that's what they're referring to as now, is predominantly talking the talk. So that's unequivocally the new walk the walk. But the problem is, my generation, at least in the United States, the millennials transitioned from the idea that talk is cheap, action means everything. But that's when we lived in a paradigm where the vast majority of interactions tend to be actions that doesn't involve the exchange of words. Nowadays, I would say 95% of my time that I'm awake involves using your words, typing words, reading words, and bridging language barriers and cultures. So you have to intellectually process most of these things as opposed to fill it out, live by example, by like, I mean, you still get that on YouTube, like running on YouTube or like doing amazing things on stuff, but it has become deceptive because the most experience people have and interactions with that type of content is through comments. It's through exchanging words. So that is my goal. That's my jam. That's why I like being on the internet. I like being on the internet because the one skill that I'm addicted to is communication. And communication, yes, you can have non-verbal communication. Absolutely. But the internet spends predominantly well over 50%. I'm going to say conservatively, 70% of the time, people use language, words, spoken or written, as the major form of communication, not even face. Like, yeah, we see a lot of Twitch streaming and all that and stuff, so but when you go out to communicate, generally you're the most comfortable using your words. And how to effectively use those things is so much fun, you know? Like at least that's my jam. So I walk the walk. I play Neverwinter this way in order to express it in the same way, like or try to express it. It won't ever be 100% great because I have my own preferences and my own biases. So they will flavor that, but it's so much more approachable and it makes one far more charismatic than projecting one's own projecting one's own inward likes. It doesn't make you a superstar though. So if you want to be a superstar, like for example, I'm gonna balance it out with some cons, right? Or some pros and cons of these things. If you want to be a superstar and you want to stick out, this approach doesn't make you stick out unless you emphasize the thing that you're doing. So I will always emphasize that I'm a gatekeeper for communication. However, when I'm playing these games and streaming, that may or may not be apparent. Like, so when someone asks me, like, what's my favorite game I'm playing right now? It's the game I'm playing. And then someone's like, oh, so you're more of a vibe and go with the flow thing. It's like, no, not necessarily, but I'll try to explain it. I'll try to explain it as best as I can. I love to focus on the thing I'm trying to experience because I literally, no, I wish it was literal. I figuratively want to divorce myself from everything else in order to evaluate and determine what I'm experiencing now. And it's a fun challenge to me. Like, challenging things can be fun or they can't be fun. Like, there are things, but the greatest challenge is to divorce yourself from your preferences. And in order to understand Neverwinter, right, online, the design thing, I have to remember that I don't play PSO NGS, but I still bring it back in some way. First, I evaluate the product, and then I step back and provide perspective. But perspective tends to warp the evaluation of anything in general. And that's very human. It's the most normal thing. It's one of the human conditions. Humans seek perspective, and perspective creates emotional comparisons that may bias. It's baggage. That's what perspective is. Like, if you want to view it like if addiction is a habit that's not sustainable and you don't desire it, perspective, what'd you call it? Perspective is bias in the sense of the grand scheme of things. So the more perspective you have, the inherently more biased you are. Like, you can't have omniscient and still be like detached from that fact. So for example, this game has terrible story composition, and meanwhile all you're thinking about is Baldur's Gate 3. Is that a way to evaluate the thing? Certainly, it's very human. It's like the essence of being human. You can as much as you want to compartmentalize, that's being inhuman, right? You're trying your best not to be human. So, it would be unfair of me to accuse you of being selfish and acting human by wanting to play Neverwinter the way you want. That would be very unfortunate, and that would be gaslighting and probably potentially moral grandstanding, right? That stuff, not so much. But the idea is I can understand how you feel, or at least I try my best to understand. I actually feel this similar to you, while at the same time I'm basically not entertaining that part of my own preferences and learning to find the fun, I guess, in doing it some other way. That's why I started running again, and I don't know, maybe doing other things, but listening to rap music, right? Not, that might sound a little general, but listening to very specific rap music, because I'm trying to understand how polyrhythms work in different regional rap music, and that takes a bit because I have my own preferences. But in the journey of doing something that I don't normally do, our brains do this remarkable thing of like finding the joy in something you invest time in. But our brain also does the great thing or bad thing if it causes you to constantly do those things. So what happens is you get better at doing those things. And ironically and counterintuitively, your brain protects you as well by making you not want to do new things. But at the same time, that prevents you from developing a sustainable habit. So you kind of got to know these things, right? The more you can appreciate these things in your own terms. So I'm saying these things the way I see them, but they can manifest differently in someone else's. Like, for example, a person I'm familiar with a lot of times, in order for him to find an ability to engage in something else, that person must enable themselves to act irrationally, to act toxic to that thing. But if it's controlled and it's intentional, it gives that person power to dislike something with awareness. And because of that intent, it makes him appreciate the few things he likes a lot, as opposed to the thing he typically do, right? Is to be nice, always be nice. And that's kind of one of the vicious cycles. Dinner's ready, so yep, no worries. Been hearing your view on all this. Yeah, no worries. And then I'm gonna continue finishing this week. Thanks for hanging out. Yeah, I do these digressions whenever the opportunity presents itself. And then, if you ever want to go see it, it's gonna be on a video somewhere. Yeah. Take care, enjoy your dinner. Enjoy your night or evening. It's late. Yeah, sleep well. Yeah. Take care. Thanks for hanging out. All right. Okay. Let's refocus. Thanks for the wishful thoughts.